because I would hear the male leaders saying, oh, the women aren't really doing anything. We don't have any good leaders. And I would look around and I would see all these fantastic women who were making fabulous contributions to the organization. And it made no sense.
Have more research on that, like you did. This is so important work.
We have to show what women are doing, and we have to name the issues that they're encountering.
Naming, exactly.
And earlier in my career, I didn't have words for things. I didn't know how to describe what was going on. I just had this sense of unease. Amy's in my first article we called Making the Invisible Visible. And of course, the whole concept of it being a glass wall is that it's really hard to see a glass wall, but it is most definitely there, right?
Most pleasure to welcome a co-author of a great book that has just been coming out on gender bias and the subtle ways how gender bias still affects women at the workplace. It's called Glass Walls, Shattering the 6 Gender Bias Barriers Still Holding Women Back at Work. And it is my great pleasure to welcome Leanne Dzubinski, who is Professor of Leadership at the Asbury Seminary. A very warm welcome to you, Leanne.
Thank you, Alex. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
Me too. I'm happy that you're giving this interview because this will be an eye-opener. Co-authored this book together with Amy Deal, who is also professor, and you're both doing this really important research on gender bias. Can I first of all ask you, before we dive into the 6 gender bias barriers that you're actually outlining, what were the main motivations for you to write this book?
A little bit of background of how we came to write this book together, because it gets at our stories and what we were living through and why this book was so important for us. So I came up through working in faith-based nonprofits for many years. And I saw as an active member of this organization how marginalized women were, right? So all our training was the same, all our passions and desire to work with these organizations was the same. But I noticed that women, the longer they were with the organization, how they would sort of become cynical or a little disconnected. And I didn't understand that. But the longer I was there, I realized that they were just sort of invisible in the workplace. And I myself, when I tried to lead the way I saw other leaders who were men doing things, I would get myself into trouble. I would be criticized for being too direct or for making a decision a certain way, even though I had seen the men around me do the exact same things. And so one of the ways that I started working on this was to do academic study. So I did a practical doctorate where I just studied the women in that organization to find out what were they actually doing, because I would hear the male leaders saying, oh, the women aren't really doing anything. We don't have any good leaders. And I would look around and I would see all these fantastic women who were making fabulous contributions to the organization. And it made no sense.
Your book, because it's really putting the finger on it. We need to have more research on that, like you did. This is so important work.
We have to show what women are doing, and we have to name the issues that they're encountering.
Naming, exactly.
And earlier in my career, I didn't have words for things. I didn't know how to describe what was going on. I just had this sense of unease, right? And so Amy had really similar experiences coming up through the world of information technology. So when we met at a conference about 10 years ago, we started talking about our studies. And we thought that it was going to be really different because the world of faith and religion is thought of as really conservative and higher ed and technology, much more liberal, advanced. But the more we talked, the more we realized, no, our women have the same issues. The issue isn't the field you work in. It's the fact that you're a woman in whatever field you're in.
That triggers the behavior.
Exactly. Goes back to gender.
Now, if I may dive into these 6 gender bias barriers that you actually outline in the book, and I recommend all the viewers, please have a look at this wonderful book. It is actually what you just said. It is exactly doing that. It is naming. One thing that you have actually named so wonderfully is male privilege. And you will explain all about it. But for me, this put like it was like an eye-opener total, because I felt it the whole time, but I could not describe it.
Research, what we found is that male privilege, it's men's inherent advantage in the workplace, because workplace cultures typically have been built by men with men's patterns, lifestyles, needs with themselves in mind. And so they control the resources, they set the standards, and it's not necessarily they set the standards, and it's not necessarily intentional or meant to exclude women, but the impact is that it really kind of does, right? Even think about our typical 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 workday. Well, who is that good for? If you have any kind of caretaking responsibilities, you
it's
may need
not
to be getting the
adapted to
children
that.
off to school.
Yeah.
Right. Or you may need to be picking them up after school, or there may
Mm-hmm.
be somebody else who needs care, or there's groceries to be bought. And if the stores close at 5, but you have to be at work until 5,
Yeah.
where's the food going to come from? So it was built on an assumption that men were in the workplace, and
Mm-hmm.
if they had families, they had someone else to take care of all those other things.
Yeah. So not even what you're saying, basically, if I understand you correctly, you're not even saying it might not have been intentional. It's just coming from the fact that originally everything was built around men, and that created a certain behavior and a culture in society.
The way work is structured, all of this just flowed out of men building what worked for them, which is natural, but it's also pretty out of date.
Like this needs a complete update and redesign how workplaces are thought. Yes. Now, could you outline a bit more the other five gender bias barriers that you found in the research?
So flowing out of this male privilege, the next one that we uncovered, we named disproportionate constraints. So what we mean by that is in the workplace, women are constrained to act in certain ways that are supportive of men, and they're held to unequal standards compared to men. So that's a little bit of what you were saying, of feeling like you would assume your male colleague deserved it, but for yourself, you would say, oh, I have to work so much harder. Well, that's an example of unequal standards. We think women have to work harder and prove themselves more than men do, because the underlying assumption is men deserve to be there and women have to prove ourselves.
And that's an assumption that is it's everywhere. Even myself, I have that assumption, but it's not spoken. So
in our research, that this is one of the most prevalent and the most subtle. So one of the things that we hear over and over again, and I'm really curious if this resonates with you, is that women find their voices muted. So it's hard to speak up in a meeting. It's hard to get your opinion heard. It's hard to get your thoughts across. You find yourself interrupted by your male colleagues. You may even find a male colleague taking your idea and repeating it for you and then getting credit for it. So we've had some words like Hepeat enter our vocabulary.
Hepeat. Oh, may I just underline that? Yeah, that one resonates with me. It's kind of like male validation. So if a male validates something in a meeting in front of all of them, it's kind of feeling like valuing more than if a female validates something. Yep. That one resonates. Definitely.
Is called insufficient support. And by that, we mean that women lack access to social structures and to networks that would help them advance. And it can also include leaders that are just flat out unsupportive to women in the workplace. And this could show up as trivializing their concerns, not taking them seriously, disbelieving if women report discrimination or harassment, just all the subtle ways that we can communicate that we're not really supportive.
And that one is important as well. If I may add to that, what you've just described in this gender bias, is actually absence of something. So it's very hard for women, again, to describe it because there was nothing. It's actually the absence of it's not supporting means the person can say, no, I've not done anything. If this is repeated, people start to suffer from it.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Mentally, physically, emotionally.
Yeah,
we heard those stories. And yes, because women are fighting a whole extra layer of things at work that men don't have to deal with. We're the first three that are perhaps a little more subtle or not so direct. And then from here, we move into things that feel more overt, right? Okay. So the next barrier, number 4, is devaluation. And so this consists of attempts to make women seem unimportant or to detract from their authority. So this could be everything from not paying women the same amount as their male colleagues for the same work, to expecting women to do things like office housework. Is that a familiar concept to you?
Yes, a common one. I mean, it's. Let's
Yeah.
be very frank. This is a standard one. Let's say that in all countries that I have worked in, and there are many, I've seen that pattern. And I mean, the payment pattern, that's an obvious one, because we have the statistics of all the European countries, of all the Western countries. I don't know about the Eastern countries, but must be. I assume it's similar. But we know that there is a pay gap, and then the office kind of homework also, I guess you might have found, must be coming from that attributed roles that we still associate gender to.
Yes,
you know.
we still associate gender with female with the home. And so if the kitchen needs to be cleaned up, or notes need to be taken in a meeting, or somebody needs to go get coffee, the default assumption is going to be that it's a woman who should do that. Even if she's higher status than the men in the room. And we have so many stories about women who are CEOs being asked by a visitor to get the coffee.
Oh, yes, of course.
Because of this ingrained assumption that the woman must be there in a support role, or a stereotypically
or in
female.
A caretaking role. Exactly.
Caretaking role. Yeah.
Interviews, I guess, unstructured interviews for this research.
We have done a multiple forms of data collection. So Amy and I each started with interviews with our women in our respective fields. So that was our first round of data collection. Then we developed a survey with 2 quantitative researchers so that we could actually measure these things.
Very
and the
good.
survey is where we got the framework of the 6 from, and how each of the subparts fits underneath the 6. And in the survey, we also had open-ended questions where we just asked women, what else are you running into?
So that things would come up that we would not expect, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
And then from there, for the survey, we surveyed women in law, in medicine, in higher education, and in the faith-based nonprofits. And then for our final round of data collection, we just went out and scoured everything public we could find. Everything from Oprah's books or Michelle Obama's books, to Twitter feeds, to things people were posting, to news articles.
Yeah, great.
Just expanded to everything we could find to hear women's voices and their stories of what they run into when they go to work.
This is excellent. So if I may just underline, so you have this huge data set that actually really proves these patterns. It's not something that you came up with. It's really in our society, there and present. So that's what I love about this book. It's research-based, so it shows a fact. It's not something, sometimes people, even the discourse that I observe sometimes about gender bias is very if some people might think that this, no, they are facts. So I think what we can all do to underline what you've done in your important work is to use the gender bias words that you developed in the book, that you found in the research, and to use them in everyday life.
That's what we need. We need names for things. Amy's, in my first article, we called Making the Invisible Visible. And of course, the whole concept of it being a glass wall is that it's really hard to see a glass wall, but it is most definitely there, right? And so we want to make them visible, give them names, help women to have a term when something happens, instead of just feeling uncomfortable, to be able to say, oh, that was, and have a name for it.
And
I
really, because talking about things and making them visible, as you said, might help us also with that issue of what you said in the beginning of the interview. Like, we feel something and we feel something is not right here, but we can't do anything about it because we don't have a phenomenon. We don't have a social representation for it.
It's like you finds this validating, right? It's like, oh, it's not me. It's not something wrong with me. It's not bad for me to feel uncomfortable. There was actually something here. Right. And so I love that it helps all of us together to feel more confident and maybe less anxious and less stressed, because it's validating. It says, oh, there is actually something going on here. And there's a reason I feel the way I do.
Exactly. And there's a reason. And also, I don't have to feel guilty. What is the typical, that is coming from my own experience. What is my typical experience in these situations? And I can relate to so many gender bias situations that you have outlined, is that I would feel guilty for it. Because I don't know what's going on. So I can't, so it must be me.
It must be me. Exactly.
And that is not a good response, because then in the long term, it leads to always questioning yourself, when actually in a social situation, there's always more than one person, implicated. So
but woman after woman thinks it's her and takes personal responsibility. The value of the research, as you were saying earlier, is we hear the same story from 900 women. We know it's not a woman's problem. It's a structure problem, a culture problem,
societal
a system
problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
And not of one
Societal problem.
country. It's really a societal problem.
Yeah. So our next one, next to last, is hostility. Now, this is where it's really becoming active and overt resistance to women's presence in the workplace. So it can be overt discrimination, it can be harassment, it can be retaliation. But the goal is always to keep women in their supposed place. And the one that's really tricky here is what we've called female hostility. And it's when other women are not supportive of women. And that always seems to make us scratch our heads, right? I think we walk into the workplace and we expect a woman colleague to be supportive. And sometimes they're not. And so we spend a fair amount of time trying to understand this particular phenomenon and unpack what's going on and explain it. And in our opinion, Amy's and mine, this is not about a bad woman. This is about a woman who's in the system that puts all this pressure on. And she has been socialized the exact same way as everybody else. And so typically, to protect herself and her territory, maybe the progress she's made, maybe the collegiality she's built with male colleagues, she may also enact these behaviors. But it's not necessarily her being a bad person. It's this socialization into the same system.
It's kind of it's an individual response to the societal, it's kind of a behavior. And we all know about this. Some part of our beliefs, feelings and behaviors come from our own personality, but part of them are social. And so we have this imitation behavior of the culture we're in. And with time, we think it's normal to do that because everyone else is doing it. Yes. So is that what you're referring to? This kind of,
that kind of, exactly.
And this is what I can relate to, because we tend to always give individuals the responsibility for their behavior, but there's always the individual part, but there's also the social part. And I think there have been studies as well, if I remember correctly, about taking people out of their social context, putting them into a different social context and watching what they're doing, and they will start new behaviors because the social pressure of that new context will implicate new behaviors as well.
Yes, very careful to say it's this social pressure. You know, imagine a woman who's gained there's one seat on the executive team and she's managed to gain that seat. She wants to keep that seat. And the problem isn't that she wants to keep that seat. It's that the group has decided there's only one seat.
Oh, yes.
Right?
The fact that there's only one is actually the problem.
The problem.
Yeah. What you were saying earlier as well, we need to think of designing workplaces differently to create a different context. And that would mean that there would be 7 seats for women and maybe just 3 for men, for example, if I now may turn to the other extreme. But that would be the implication, to think about the structure and the social setting in a different way.
But it's easier to just blame her and say, oh, she doesn't want to share. Well, she's not the only one in that setting who's.
Exactly. That's really insightful what you just said, because we, even now in that situation, I didn't question why there's only one seat. It's true. We have these assumptions and we don't question them. So, yes, of course.
Number 6, this one we called Acquiescence. And so in this one, we're describing how women, due to the combined weight of all these other barriers and the fact that we all internalize these pressures, women simply accept it as valid, like you just said, not even thinking to question it, and adapt to those limitations. And so some women will choose to be quiet and not speak up, for example, about bias they encounter. Some women choose not to try to progress or to limit their own aspirations because they look around and say, it's not worth the extra effort that it's going to cost me if I want to move into that next role. Yeah. And really, that's a very rational choice because they are truly looking and seeing real obstacles and saying, okay, I'm going to choose that that's not the fight I want to be in.
Think to yourself, okay, who is going to do the first step? And we all have to do some steps because otherwise nothing will change.
Yes, right.
And then, and brave people like you do the first step by saying, okay, here is the problem. Let's all do something by talking about it. That's already a huge step.
That is a step. And even for a woman like that to be able to name what's going on and understand the choice she's making. Right. And then possibly understand that that's a good choice for this year, given whatever is going on in her life. But maybe next year, things will be look different.
These were the gender bias barriers, and as we outlined them, so powerful because they give us they allow us to verbalize what is really going on. Now, what would you recommend to women who hear this, or men who hear this, who want to make a difference in small steps in everyday life and say, okay, I don't want to fall in line with what previously has been happening. I want to be an inclusive leader and I want to make a small difference in my cultural environment. What would you recommend? What could be a first small step?
So in our book, at the end of each chapter, we have extensive recommendations. So honestly, our argument is that the change that needs to happen needs to start at the top. It needs to start with the organization's leaders. And so we really do put the onus of responsibility on leaders to understand what's going on in their own organization, to diagnose it, and then to work out an action plan. So I will happily say what individuals can do, but I really think it's important that we start by saying individuals can make a small difference in their space. The really powerful change is going to come when the top leaders get on board with this and understand why they need to do it and then how to invest in it.
To leave the main responsibility where the formal authority has been attributed. Yes. Fair enough.
That is a really good way to put it. Yes. And so in our book, we lay out all these barriers and we give plenty of illustrations. That survey that we developed can be downloaded. An organization can use it with their women to find out what women are experiencing. Yeah.
Oh, that one, if I may, can I link that one in the survey?
Yes, I'll get you the link.
Oh, brilliant. Because this is a huge resource, for organizations.
Right. And so then at that point, what I would say is leaders need to have their women do this survey to understand what's going on, analyze it, and then honestly, the best thing to do is something, right?
Yeah.
It's too easy to,
nicely put.
to throw up our hands and say, oh, this is too big a problem. We can't. Gender bias sounds very nebulous, right? It sounds fluffy, but in reality, we've just diagnosed 6 big pieces of it, and you can diagnose in your organization what's going on, and then you can pick one of them to work on. Yeah. And if we start working on it piece by piece, we can change it. It's completely fixable. Yeah. If we're willing to do the work.
So maybe the recommendation would be also to just start with one and see where this is leading the organization, because we don't have to save the world all at once. Because gender bias, that is something that I saw a lot in the workplaces that I worked for, that people then try to, for example, let's take diversity. People try to say, okay, now we have a new vision and mission about diversity all in one. And same thing could happen here, gender bias all in one. And it doesn't work like that. It will not work because you can't solve gender bias in one day. So what you're saying here is very practical, because you're basically saying, okay, start with one little thing and the recommendations in your book will help. Put the finger on it and just see what happens in maybe some small areas of the organization and then spread from there, right?
Exactly. Do a salary audit and figure out if you need to equalize pay. That would be one way to start. Or work on your meeting cultures so that women are able to engage and bring their voices and don't get interrupted, right? Just pick something, but imagine if meeting cultures across the organization were changed, how the ripple effect would spread out.
Oh, wow. Yeah, right? That one would have one. Definitely. Yeah. Absolutely. And also there's the seat example. Sorry to interrupt you, but the seat example as well, you said, provide more seats so that no fight has to emerge from that one seat. That would be my preferred one for my main.
Right. Do a tokenism audit, right? A token is when there's only 1 or 2 representatives of any particular group in a room, a department, a meeting, whatever it is. So do an audit and say, how many places have we got one poor woman or one poor person of some other diverse background expected to speak for everybody in that category? Yeah. And shift that dynamic, like you're saying, and make sure there's at least 3 in any given spot. Right?
Can you also establish the link now? So thank you for all these great tips. Can you establish maybe as a final question the link to psychological safety? Because obviously now there's all this talk going on diversity, psychological safety. Can you do a final statement on how what you outline in your book can actually then help organizations establish these psychological safe environments or organizations?
Women who read this book not walk away with a sense of despair. or
Yeah.
allies in the workplace, or even leaders. I don't want people to walk away with a sense of despair, because that's psychologically unsafe. If there's no hope, then there's nothing that can be done.
Oh,
And
well, that is
so
beautiful what you just said. Yeah, we need to first of all have hope.
have to have hope. So when I put under psychological safety, the very first thing I think about is, how do we give people a sense of hope?
Mhm.
And so I would say, by a good diagnosis leads us to a good cure, right?
Mhm.
And so by having a good diagnosis, the book can feel perhaps a little heavy at times, because we do tell so many stories
Mhm.
of things that were not done well. But at the same time, each chapter we end with pages of suggestions of how to do it better. And so it's really important, I would say, that we walk away with a sense of, we can fix this. We can
Yes.
make change. There
Mhm.
is hope, right? And whether we're the top leader who can really bring change for the whole organization, or whether we're just whether we have a departmental responsibility, or even an individual, an ally, or a woman herself, to have
Mhm.
hope that this isn't, we're not perpetually condemned to live in this unhealthy environment, but we can do something about
Ah,
it.
this is beautiful, because the feeling of hope is actually something that contributes to psychological safety, and feeling also empowered to raise your voice and say, hang on, I have an issue with this. How this one seat is attributed to this room where a woman is only supposed to be in this one seat. And to voice that needs hope, and also feeling of, I have the backs of the other people, even if they're male.
Right.
And usually the voice raisers in this situation needs to be women. So psychological safety means, in this case, as you said so wonderfully, hope and safety. And like, what is the other word that I'm looking for? It's kind of this feeling of, it's peace, right? It's not that we're in a fight, because I guess what has happened as well, because years of gender studies have now passed, but still, how it feels in an organization, it's kind of like a battle, if I may say that. I don't know. Do you have accounts on that as well, that people feel like fighting?
We didn't hear that a whole lot, but I have read some of those studies that you're talking about. And, pitting each other against one another, that feeling of fighting, that competitiveness, even that is sort of a very stereotypical masculine construct.
Exactly.
And our workplaces will be healthier if we can break that down.
Yeah.
And see that we actually do better when we work together, when we collaborate, that we don't lose something vital when we support each other instead of competing or fighting with each other.
Exactly. That's also a historic representation of the workplace, of competition. Exactly. And that doesn't help in that situation, because then the males might think, or men might think, okay, they're fighting against us. That's an important one. What we are just developing in this interview here.
And that's not what we want to communicate, because that's not good for anyone, right? Pitting ourselves against each other, that tears everybody down.
That's the common trap, I guess, of gender, of doing something about gender bias, that you then end up having these feelings of, oh, they're competing against us, they don't want us. I'm now talking for the male side, and that's not the intention.
That is not the intention. That is not the message of our book at all. Our message is never that men are the enemy. It's that we could do better, working better together. Yeah.
And using all that wonderful potential that is lost by excluding women.
Right.
That is actually there.
And I think that the other piece I would add to, and I liked your words, I would add persevere. Persevere and keep trying. And also the flip side of that is know when to walk away, because part of psychological safety is not feeling trapped, right? So yes, you need hope. And also you may need to know that it's okay to leave and when it's time to leave.
Yeah. That one important, that you're not kind of feeling in a jail where you have to for the next 20 years, kind of, there's no exit. Important one, definitely. Great. Okay. Wow. These were so many insightful points. Your motto of the book as a final.
I don't know that we have a motto for the book, but here's what I would say. Don't feel invisible and don't be invisible. Read the book, learn the terms, recognize what's going on, call it out for yourself. If you can't call it out for yourself, maybe you can call it out for a friend. Sometimes that's safer.
Oh God, yeah.
Right? But become aware, because when we're aware, then we can do something about it.
Oh, that is wonderful. Thank you so much for this lovely interview.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.